Ghana's Most Wanted, the OSP versus Ofori-Atta. There's a lot that has been happening today on this major developing story that has taken the world by storm. It's been reported on all of the international wires also because, of course, it has to do with the finance minister with some international clout. Remember, his own background is in banking and finance globally. And so there's a lot that is at stake here. The world is paying attention to this. Let's focus a bit more on some of the things you're learning tonight on this. We know that there's 5 various potential charges that Ofori-Atta is wanted for, and a number of them have to do with deals that was done, approval that he gave as the finance minister, contract between the Strategic Mobilization Service, and that is the revenue assurance one that is very controversial indeed, was a subject of an investigation. The cancellation of the ECG's agreement with Beijing BXC is another one. You have the National Cathedral, the famous one, Ministry of Health contract for the 207 ambulances is also another one. And that is why the OSP is looking for him. This is what the OSP did today. They told us yesterday they would do this, and today they did it. Wanted is on the OFC's website now. They have now triggered the process to have this picked up by Interpol, and the red notice they expect should go through, but not just yet, because there are processes that the OSP would need to fulfill, conditions that we need to fulfill before the Interpol picks this up and becomes an active manhunt for him wherever he is in the world. So again, key question. What do we know tonight, as in where he is? We know he is in the US. That is a fact, because his lawyers told us that that's where he is. But very interestingly, the OSP doesn't appear to know where. At least when they put this notice out today, they talked about possible locations. Possible locations. A few of the locations they put up because they don't know exactly where. US is one, UK is the other, South Africa is the other, Guyana is the other place they said he could be, Cayman Islands and Hong Kong. So the OSP itself isn't sure where Ofori-Atta is right now as they look for him globally. This global manhunt for him. They don't know where he is. They're talking about these 6 places. But the lawyers have told us tonight that he is in place number 1 in the USA. And you could guess that because obviously his doctor's note that we saw today was leaked to the press, said he is going to receive medical attention somewhere in the US in a clinic called the Mayo Clinic, right? And this is the Mayo Clinic. And we learned a few things. We know that if the OSP wants to arrest him, and that's not the OSP has confirmed that, the OSP is not simply looking for him to sit down and interrogate him so he can go. The OSP is looking to arrest him. And that is why the OSP is saying that they want him here in person, because they can't arrest you on Zoom. They can arrest you in person. But the Mayo Clinic, where he is, well, he says in the doctor's note, and was signed by a doctor, at least the OSP doesn't believe this, it says allegedly so, but if you speak to those who are in his camp, Ofori-Atta's camp, they'll tell you it's very authentic indeed. The doctor's note from the Mayo Clinic in Minnesota. We know that he is going to be there on June 13th for surgery. Why? Because he's been diagnosed with cancer. He has prostate cancer. We've learned that today. Why? Because it's in the doctor's note. And that is important. So the OSP says they're looking for him in 6 countries across the world. But if they really, really, really need to arrest him, they can do so on the 13th, because he's going to be here. Let me walk to the other side. He's going to be here at Mayo Clinic. And this area here is the Mayo Clinic. We pulled this up on Google Earth. The OSP is looking. Everybody's looking, right? We know on the 13th, as I said, he's going to be here. This is the area where he's going to be. The OSP needs to be looking at this picture and sending individuals there if they really mean business. Wait for him to show up at the Mayo Clinic, and that there is the building to pick him up before he checks in for the surgery. If they really, really mean business, that tells us a story of what they can do to get him. And that is the building there. And this is the building they've been looking at. And this entire place is a Mayo Clinic enclave. And that's the building there you see beeping for you. 13th, there's a date that the OSP indeed now know, courtesy his doctors, and they can track him to this particular area on the 13th and hope to get him back into the country for questioning. Remember, they've already filed an extradition treaty. And if they manage to get here, they have to obviously deal with the U.S. laws that has to do with this. They have to trigger that. They said they have triggered that. But it isn't that simple. Even if they get here and they find him in this enclave, this entire enclave is a Mayo Clinic. They find him in this enclave, walking into the Mayo building to get that surgery for prostate cancer. Even if they find him there, they will need to still go to legal processes there to have him extradited to Ghana. But it's a very important point that we also need to stress tonight, whilst the OSP is looking for him there on the 13th of June when he shows up in this area to try and get the surgery for this. One, we've learned from the OSP tonight that they have triggered processes to get the Attorney General through the Foreign Affairs Ministry, our Foreign Affairs Ministry, working through our embassy in Washington to have our security agents there do tracking, for example, facilitate his arrest, location, arrest, detention, and extradition to Ghana. Because every embassy will have an NIB attaché at the embassy in Washington. We'll have a Ghanaian police officer there. You have a military intelligence there. That is what espionage is all about. We have men there trained to track him. The question really is, the OSP has been doing press conferences on this. They need to, by now, know where he is, precisely, where he slept last night, who he talked to, because we have agents trained in a Washington office. If you didn't have that, then that would be a real catastrophe for a country like ours not to have NIB agents trained to track him and know his whereabouts. He should know, but they've confirmed to us that they're working to the Attorney General and the Foreign Affairs Ministry to track him. So they know that they can track him to this place. The thing is, though, that the OSP doesn't believe that he's there. But a few more things there to note as far as the bigger picture is concerned. Because now that the OSP has indeed told us about the international notice that they've sent, we're now looking at the total picture of what it is that the OSP is trying to put Ken Ofori-Atta in. Yesterday, 6,568 red notices. Today is dropped slightly, and if Ofori-Atta's one is accepted, it would go up again. But this is a very important point I need to re-emphasize. It isn't automatic that because the OSP said it, then Interpol will just pick it up and publish it, and that they will begin to act on it. No. They will have to request, which is what they have done. Once they request, Interpol will have to review, because it's not automatic. They have to review, and they have to tick a few boxes. They must be sure that it isn't politically motivated. And that is a very important point to think about, that what is happening isn't politically motivated. If the Interpol comes to the conclusion that this request is politically motivated, it will decide not to agree to that request. It's in Interpol's own constitution, and member states have signed on to that. OSP knows that, and that is a key point. And I'm pretty sure you know by now, Ofori-Atta is very well connected. I'm pretty sure very proactively his lawyers and people associated to him will be calling Interpol and telling them this is politically motivated. And Interpol will be considering that in this review, right? And that is important. That is important to know. And then if they agree that it isn't politically motivated, but that's not really a condition, right? And it meets the other key requirements in the Interpol constitution, and then they publish. If they publish, then there's this active search by Interpol. Wherever he is found, he will then be detained for our officers to pick him up, because this is not an arrest warrant. The notice is not an arrest warrant at all, right? Because we want him, and we've issued this. They would obviously comply because you are members, and then we have to go and pick him up. So we are nowhere near this being resolved as far as the Interpol leg of this is concerned. But once they pick it up and it becomes a red notice on the Interpol page, it is a big deal, and Ofori-Atta is in hotter waters. Tonight, my guests will join me as we begin to unpack this from a diplomatic point of view, from a legal point of view, But from a security point of view, there are real implications for all of this and intricacies of this that we haven't quite explored that we'll try and do tonight if you stay with me here on PM Express. Stay with us here on PM Express. We are still awaiting a decision from Parliament on the new bill that will impose a tariff, a new tax on the fuel you buy at the pumps, 1 cedi per every litre. Once Parliament passes it, I will update you. But in the meantime, PMX is always brought to you by Syntex Tanks. It is strong, it is tough. Academic Times and Pepsodent Cavity Fighter toothpaste. Joining me right now in the studio is a lawyer, a former director of the Ghana School of Law. He joins me in the studio on this matter. There are a lot of legal issues to unpack, and so I'm happy that he joins me in the studio. Professor Sansari, my guest. Adam Senanu is anti-corruption campaigner, also joins us on Zoom. We have Nane J. Bafo-Iwa, he is MP for Menchir South, and Victor Docker is a security expert and has been looking at the security angles to it, both national and international security, as far as the OSP's ability to conduct if you like, recce and know where he is, apprehend him, bring him to Ghana. There are security implications as far as that is concerned. And can he really rely on our security operatives working in our embassies in the UK, US, and the 6 countries that he's expecting him to be to facilitate the arrest, detention, and repatriation? I'll get him to weigh in on that pretty shortly. So stay with me. I want to come to you, Mr. Sassari, on this matter. So tonight, where we are is the lawyers for Ken Ofori-Atta today spoke publicly about the doctor's note that we then saw circulate on social media, but they have now since confirmed that indeed it's authentic from the Mayo Clinic, that he had been diagnosed with prostate cancer. He's scheduled to go for a surgery on the 13th of June. Mayo is in Minnesota. And because of that, and post-surgery on the 13th of June, he would need time to recover. And so that's why he can't come. OSP says, well, you didn't give me that document, so I formally don't have it. They've gone ahead to now declare him wanted formally. They have triggered the processes for Interpol to also issue the red notice. Legally, has the OSP checked all the boxes for you?
Thank you. I think my answer will be yes. Legally, for the fact that the OSP is operating under the OSP Act, which is law enacted by Parliament, everything he has to, do must have support in law. So provided, the conditions are met. But Evans, my problem is, if my good friend Ken Ofori-Atta is that much ill, and therefore, cannot be physically present, the lawyers must do the needful, at least, not to give a misleading impression that Ken is faking an illness, because this is a very, very sensational and screaming case, which is testing the endurance, of the Republic of Ghana in its fight against corruption. So merely putting out information on the internet that Ken, has been diagnosed with cancer, and therefore will not be able to, show up physically, I think we'll be begging the question, if indeed, genuinely, he is sick. The OSP's office is an institution, that is managed by a human being. And I think that the OSP, the special prosecutor himself, would wish to approach this matter with, a human face and human dignity. I don't think that the special prosecutor will, by all means, attempt to bring Ken Ofori-Atta, to face the rigors of the law if he's sick. No one will do that. So I think perhaps the legal team is not approaching the matter in a way that will attract the sympathy of the nation. What they are rather doing, is sort of antagonizing the entire nation. They are infuriating people. They are provoking people. So if I were, in charge of the legal team, my advice to Ken would be, if you are sick, please produce, the document, because under the OSP law, there must be production of documents. After all, the law deals with evidence. So if there's hard evidence, no one can run away, from the pieces of evidence that will be made available. I suspect strongly that maybe Ken feels that he's being hounded out for persecution. My word may be too strong, but I think that's how he feels.
So that is why the approach has been adopted to say, okay. But let me bring in Bafo, you agree with that point, that we may have lost him there. I'll bring him back in. But Adam Senanu, you obviously are an anti-corruption campaigner. You obviously want individuals who may have been involved in corruption held accountable. But is the way this is being approached the right way to get accountability from the former finance minister?
Actually, I think that Lawyer Ansasari hits the nail on the head when he says that the legal team have not approached this right. When they started out by accusing the OSP of masterminding the raid on Ken Ofori-Atta's house, which was not the case, and then you have negotiated a new date, and you give no communication till 4 days to the deadline, and then you say he can't make it. You're really not handling an issue of this gravity the way that will give the OSP assurance. In fact, what I found very intriguing was that yesterday on all platforms, I was saying, listen, they've still not provided medical report from the facility that provides the details, that explains what is going on, and that goes beyond the diagnosis of a biopsy to saying, therefore, we're going to take these actions within this time frame and there will be this recuperation. And just to come today and be told that the lawyers have now started circulating a letter which they did not provide to the OSP. I don't think they've managed. I think we are where we are because the legal team has not managed it well. And in between, they have then, filed other cases, seemingly as if you're trying to say, we want to get the OSP off this entirely. I don't think it's been managed well at all.
And Bafo, while you agree?
Good evening, my brother, and good evening to the co-panelists, and also good evening to your viewers. I wouldn't be too concerned about the conduct of the lawyers of Ken Ofori-Atta. I am on the side of the special prosecutor because the special prosecutor works for the state and it's fighting corruption. So I would be concerned about the way forward for the special prosecutor. The fundamental question in the circumstance then would be, should the approach be a press conference to lambast or declare Ken Ofori-Atta wanted? I would take a cue from the OSP's own report in terms of how it handled the issue of the Airbus scandal, where it stated there at page 14 of the report, the first paragraph of page 14, the third paragraph of page 14, where it stated that when it became difficult to have Samuel Adam Mahama, the brother of the president, when it became difficult to have him for the purposes of interview, he flew out of Ghana, right, to go and interview him outside of Ghana. So on that score, there's a precedent by the OSP in terms of how it deals with persons outside of the country, right? And so in the circumstance, what should be the approach? I would rather want to see the OSP make progress. And so the approach for me then will not be a press conference. The approach will be to adopt the same approach they adopted in the case of President Mohammed's brother, by writing to the lawyers to say that at this point it appears difficult for Ken Ofori-Atta to come to the Republic of Ghana. And so what then is the way forward? We want to go and interview him outside of Ghana. Give us his location, because we have done it before. We can do it again. At the time it did it, it had a budget of 149 million cedis. This year, it has been given a budget of 149 million cedis. So within their same means, it should be possible for them to do it. Now,
but there's something different. Just a second. There's something different in this one, though, because the OSP tells us today that the real reason why they want him physically present is because they want to arrest him.
Okay. The fundamental question again would be, in the absence, whether or not in the absence of Ken Ofori-Atta, they can make progress in terms of their case. When you look at Act 29, they don't need Ken Ofori-Atta's arrest before proceeding against him. Act 30, when you look at Act 30, they don't need his presence before arresting him. In fact, my brother, if the presence of Ken Ofori-Atta is necessary for determining a prima facie case in the whole investigations, then clearly the case of the OSP against Ken Ofori-Atta is weak, because it would then seem that without Ken Ofori-Atta making an input into the investigations, they cannot proceed. Don't forget, under the Constitution of the Republic of Ghana, Ken Ofori-Atta has a right not to incriminate himself. So he has a right to remain silent. So what if you arrest him for the purposes of interview and he says he will not talk? Is it a case that then you cannot proceed because he decides to keep quiet? I think that the approach ought to vary. The approach ought to vary. Even if you want to arrest him, bait him. You see, there is a proverb in Chi. Se kontompo nisi onu betru mrika, manindi kain preko. Right? So it seems that Ken and his lawyers have been detecting the pace. You are an investigative body. There are times when investigative bodies pretend to tag along and not show force, not show of authority necessarily. They can pretend to tag along. Before you realize, they've hanged you in a gallows. And that is why I think that the approach adopted by the OSP, for me, needs to be varied. Okay. It needs to be varied in the public interest for the purposes of getting us results.
Yeah, I mean, thank you. I mean, and what do you make of that? That fundamentally, we want him held accountable, if indeed he's guilty of the charges. So whether you arrest him or not, the OSP had to indicate yesterday that, well, if he doesn't come, we'll try him in absentia. So just go ahead and do so.
You see, what
Honorable
is suggesting is simply this. You see, under the law, Ken Ofori-Atta can choose to remain silent. He hasn't offended any law if he remains silent. He can also decide, that he will not even return to the country. However, under the same law, he can be tried in absentia. And I don't see anything wrong with that. But there's a moral twist here. The person is alleging ailment. And if indeed it is true that he's being diagnosed, with a terminal disease, that alone will be sufficient to excuse, his absence from the country. If indeed, he were sick and, he had produced medical records. So if I were the OSP, what I'd rather do is to employ the law, to request, the establishment of a medical board to certify him wherever he is. I mean, if we know that he is, elsewhere in the U.S., why don't we liaise with the clinic that the High Commission, to go visit Ken at the clinic that, he has...
You raised an important point. So tonight I went to check that with the OSP, and they told us that they've now begun the process to get the AG to work through the Foreign Affairs Ministry to possibly now activate that in Washington, because that's where we have the embassy.
Yes, and that's fairly easy. So, you set up a board, a medical board, to see indeed if out of the certification, there'll be confirmation that he's sick. If he's sick, you don't try a sick person, if indeed he's sick. So that is where the moral argument, will arise.
Since you're on the moral point, the OSP makes a point there also to say, you may have been diagnosed with a certain illness, but that doesn't incapacitate you from traveling to come and answer questions. He has a point, does it not?
Yeah, but medically, I mean, if he says that he has a terminal disease, and therefore, he has to be flown into the country, we need to arrange, first of all, medical support, like, oxygen. You need to get an aircraft that will have all those facilities at whose expense? Is it not going to be the expense of the state? So if we can afford, why not? So you bring the person down. So for me, I think both the state and Ken Ofori-Atta should find a way, of responding to these issues of probity and accountability. Under the OSP law, the object, of the OSP law is twofold: to bring out, issues of corruption and try the perpetrators or offenders, period. And if you look at Section 3 of the OSP Act, there's a tall list of offenses that the OSP or the special prosecutor, may investigate. Now, Ken Ofori-Atta, as at now, is a mere suspect. Mm-hmm. He has not been tried yet. He's not guilty. No one has established his guilt. So he's a suspect. And because he's a suspect under Article 19, Clause 3 of our own Constitution, he's presumed to be innocent until we are able to bring him down. My take on this whole issue is, why declare him the most wanted fugitive, running away from justice? That is, where I...
What's your issue there? Why do you have an issue there?
I mean, we are making it, we are making Ken look like a murderous fugitive who has stolen all the assets. The special prosecutor has outlined 5 very serious issues, not offenses yet, but issues. If there are issues and they are not established offenses, there's a way all of us will have to go, about it, because of the dignity and its fundamental human rights enshrined in the Constitution.
So the OSP is being high-handed? You think this is their reaction to this, their approach to this doesn't fit?
I think that the state hasn't approached it, the way, that will connect with the fundamental human rights and freedoms enshrined in Chapter 5 of the Constitution. You see, because if the Constitution, gives us the presumption of innocence, that we are innocent until, our guilt is established or proven, don't declare anybody the most wanted, fugitive, red alert, he can be arrested anywhere. When you terrorize, an innocent citizen, the end result will be that he's so intimidated that he will find it very difficult to come back, because the moment, the plane lands, he will be arrested.
You think he's been terrorized?
I think so. I think it's, the long arm of the criminal law, is seeking to arrest him. So it's now longer than, what we are imagining. And we could have gone about it in a much more decent, manner. After all, in living memory, the only one maybe I can remember, I think, is Blemieza. The Blemieza. But Ken Ofori-Atta, former Minister of Finance, he's a sick person, everyone, believes that is from the perspective of the special prosecutor, that is the most wanted person, he needs to be arrested. He cannot even go out. He cannot even
let me break. Adamson, do you agree that
he cannot go.
he's being terrorized and the approach is possibly high-handed?
Too high-handed.
Sari arrives at this conclusion. Listen, there was an initial negotiation around this. The OSP at the time wasn't given any documentation. It's the same situation we find ourselves in. I would have called the OSP irresponsible if without a medical report from a facility, and I come from a biochemical medical background, so I understand the kind of documentation you would expect. It cannot be somebody just writes something which has no letterhead, has no logo, and says this is a situation and you run with it. That can't happen. And so when they asked for further and better particulars, you needed to provide the medical report that goes from diagnosis to the recommendation on what should be done and guarantees that, okay, this is the recuperation area. That has not been done. And don't forget that it was Ken Ofori-Atta and his team that negotiated to 2nd June. Now, the question on my mind, and for which reason I think Ms. Ansasari's position of terrorism is far-fetched, is that in between February 2025 and the June 2nd date, why didn't the lawyers keep the special prosecutor updated? I mean, it seems like they were being taken for granted that, they could just wait till any point and then say, unfortunately, he can't show up, without yet providing the medical report that justifies or supports the position they've taken. And so if you suddenly write a letter on the 28th of May saying he can't come for such and such reason, and that letter still did not have supporting documentation from any medical facility, what option did you leave the special prosecutor? I see no terrorism here. I think it's just an institution trying to do its professional job based on the evidence available. And Mr. Ansasari himself said that usually this is about the evidence. So in my mind, if there is evidence provided that credibly shows that this is the state, because the question on our minds is that the earlier communication suggested that this surgical intervention would be done, was it March or April? And that he needed about, was it 2 months for recuperation? And that's why they fixed the 2nd June. How come when the surgical intervention did not happen, that was not reported? How come there's been silence till 4 days to his own negotiated date? And why should anyone expect that a very important state entity like the special prosecutor should take it for granted when on the 28th of May, they receive a letter that still doesn't have supporting evidence, credible one for them to validate the situation of the person involved? I think that there's no terrorism here.
Yeah,
I think that the OSP is doing a professional job. I think that they left the OSP with no choice but the actions that have been taken. And they need to remedy what it is. I don't think it's too late in the day if evidence is provided that can be validated. And that's something that the lawyers ought to have facilitated long ago.
Yeah, and Dr. Doke, I'll come to you pretty shortly because there's so much there to unpack as to the OSP wants him. What else can he do to get him? He's triggered international processes to have him extradited, but we know that it isn't simple. We have an embassy in the 6 countries that he's mentioned. What can he leverage as far as those embassies are concerned to try and get him either picked up, etc., and brought back to Ghana? So please stay with me for a second. But I want to quickly get the view of Bafo on that question. It is the reputation of...
Please, if you can...
So it is the reputation...
If you can speak up.
Yeah, can you hear me? Bafo, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, it is the reputation of Ken Ofori-Atta at stake, right? The OSP has actually given us a hint that they still do not have an official doctor's report on his medical condition and, if you like, what we call excuse duty, if you like. I can't be here for excess reason. Doctor signs it and gives the detail. It doesn't have that. It appears that if he receives that, that will change a lot in the way he's approaching this. Shouldn't Ken Ofori-Atta himself proactively be reaching out to the OSP with this particular dog instead of fighting him in the press? It's become a media banter.
Well, if that is all the OSP required, nothing stopped him from making a request for it from his lawyers when he received the letter from his lawyers. In the absence of that, it may well seem that it is the OSP that took to the press and made all these allegations when perhaps there could have been some, decor in terms of the approach through the interaction with the lawyers and obtain the necessary information or evidence. I sympathize with the OSP to some extent because since February when he did the press conference, there has been no traction and the public has been making demands. And so in that regard, you can see some pressure on the OSP to prove it.
Okay, we maybe have lost him there. Let me bring in the Dr. Doke. Yeah, okay, we have him now. Yes, please proceed.
Said. Hello?
Yes, I lost you briefly. Yes, please proceed, yes. I can hear you.
And so you can see why there's the pressure on OSP. But at this level, when you find yourself in a position like that, you should not quail to pressure. You should not. You cannot afford to buckle under pressure. You should comply with due process of law and sometimes be guided by prudence. What the public may demand might not be your approach. Otherwise, you will make mistakes. And so that is very important. I am, having said that, yes, I'm on the side of the OSP because we are chasing public funds. However, just as Mr. Ansansari said, there's the need for us to balance that desire with the fundamental human rights of Ken Ofori-Atta. When I take the antecedent of the OSP in terms of matters he has handled, it makes me very, very cautious when I'm commenting on some of these issues. It makes me very slow in making judgments. It makes me very slow in making choices. Why do I say so? Take OSP's press conferences over a period of time. We heard of La Bianca. She was almost guilty in the media. Guilty of having, manipulated, customs of having worked in concert or conspiracy with customs officials to evade taxes, import duties and levies, and so all sort of things. All sort of allegations were made against La Bianca. What happened? In the media, the OSP was, made us all think that La Bianca was guilty. And so if the OSP had done its investigations to the extent that La Bianca was guilty, what happened to La Bianca? We all saw the CNN style of chasing Cecilia Adapa, going into her home with cameras and investigators, only for the OSP to tell us that it wasn't within its domain. We all know that, and Mr. Ansari will bear me out. If you go to the police station now to make a complaint to a police officer, the police officer will be able to tell you that this case is civil, and so it's not within our domain. When you look at the OSP's mandate, Mr. Ansari says there's a gamut of offenses. No, the offenses for which the OSP may prosecute or may investigate and prosecute are actually just 3. The rest are the kind of powers it may exercise towards the attainment of its objective. That is the investigations and prosecutions, the 3 categories of investigations and prosecutions that it may undertake, right? And so this is not too difficult to tell from a preliminary fact. When you look at a fact, you can do a preliminary assessment of a fact and tell whether it is within your remit or not. Even Cecilia Adapa, I was surprised when he said when the OSP said he had referred the matter to Yoko. Clearly, it is also outside of the remit of Yoko. Perhaps you may say FIC, Financial Intelligence.
But in that case, there's a possibility of money laundering. So that's why the
that is why
Yoko
I'm saying
was brought in.
that is the FIC. So from the preliminary facts, you can say FIC or the police. And so with Ofori-Atta, that is what happened. Only for the OSP over a year, embarrassing her, doing all sort of things, making all sort of conclusive statements in the media, supposed collaboration between the OSP and the FBI in the media, all coming to naught. Ofori-Atta is innocent until proven guilty under the laws of the Republic of Ghana. However, she was crucified in the media.
So you think that's the same thing's happening to Ken?
That is not what I am saying. All I'm saying is that the antecedent makes me very cautious in approaching some of these issues in terms of the analysis of it. I'm unable to draw similar conclusions that the OSP is drawing.
Okay.
I'm so careful in urging him on, and I'm so careful in urging everybody right on, and would rather want to sound caution, because our integrity and reputation that we work for over a period of time has to be guarded jealously.
Yeah.
And that is why the law says that we are innocent until proven
otherwise.
guilty.
And
let
me expand the conversation slightly and bring in Dr. Docker into the conversation. That's why I have. And Doctor, I'm delighted that and thankful that you listened in on just trying to sort out the legal questions around this. But there's also the international relations, but also international security angle to this. We know that he's triggered the Interpol red notice. Whether it's published or not is a different conversation. But it's a state agency. The OSP doesn't even know where he is. The lawyers have told us he's in the US. We have an embassy in the US. We have definitely NIB agents in that embassy. We should, at least. We have police officers who are posted sometimes to work from the attaché there. They should know where Ken Ofori-Atta is in the US, if indeed he is there, and report back to the OSP so he has clarity on what to do and how to proceed. Because 6 countries now, he's asking people to look for him. That is far more difficult. Instead of narrowing this down to one country, and then you trigger the repatriation, extradition conversation. There's a fundamental question there, right, Dr. Docker, as to what else he can do beyond just groping in the dark and wondering where he is.
Yes, certainly so. I like the preamble where you started with regards to the security officials who should be working in a said embassy, i.e. the NIB officials, intelligence officials, and the military attachés. Only that our military attachés are not used for espionage, so that people would be, very, very clear on that. They are there for collaboration purposes with regards to military and the security, spaces, and then bilateral, agreements with regards to that security space. Now, first of all, when Mr. Ken Ofori-Atta was leaving to the US, he went through our airport, okay?
Yeah.
So that's step 1 to ascertain where exactly he is. Simple as that. The information is in the system by going through the Ghana immigration to know exactly, because then you go to the desk of the Ghana immigration officials there at the airport. They take your details, your boarding pass, your passport, and everything. Those details are in there. However, you get to the US and then you want to ascertain where exactly he is. Now, assuming Mr. Ken Ofori-Atta has renewed his passport in the US in any of the embassies, his details will be there. Now, let's say he renewed his passport at the Washington embassy. His details will be there. And even if any other states, okay, where the officials of Ghana would want his information, they can relay to the embassies themselves there, and then the information will be circulated. Now, the core security personnel in the embassies do not have the first-hand information as to the whereabouts of the people unless they are provided with the information, because they may not handle first-hand, very, very sensitive data with regards to people's residences and addresses and all of that. So they would have to be provided on authorization of the ambassador or the chief intelligence officer there. And this is where also the Ministry of Foreign Affairs here in Ghana comes in, because then they can just direct the ambassador to provide those information, release it to the security personnel there. Now, those security personnel, they can only do one thing. They can monitor activities of Mr. Ken Ofori-Atta or any citizen.
So in other words, if the OSP was really hell-bent on getting this, even before he issued the red notice, quietly, he could have triggered this, what you're suggesting, to try and indicate to him where exactly he is in the U.S.
Exactly, he is in the U.S. Simple as that, okay? So then the security personnel in the embassy, the Ghanaian embassy, would then now just monitor his movement, provide updates as to where he goes, when he leaves home, where he goes to, at the clinic or whatever. It's very simple in that regard.
And then you make a point about clinic, right? I mean, the big controversy is about whether he's really genuinely sick or not. As part of what you're just describing, the OSP should independently, very quietly, right now be in a position to ascertain whether indeed he is sick and can come or not. We should be able to do that, right? Using as QC.
We should be able to do that. We should be able to do that. Now, even with regards to, that's why the Foreign Affairs Ministry here would have to come in. Because with regards to that authorization given to the Ghana embassy, now to even go to the clinic to ascertain, you need some worth of documentation that would warrant, but the clinic cannot just release information regards to patients.
I mean, but you can use subterfuge, right? I mean, this is what the intelligence officers who work in the embassies do. You don't necessarily have to go and say, please, I'm applying for it. They won't give you.
Yeah, but then we need to be careful, okay? You may get information wrong. I may be visiting a clinic just to see someone, but then you need to really have evidence that I'm, seeking assistance, medical assistance, and I've gone through, patients or whatever to ascertain. You need concrete evidence, and that may come at a risk. You may be found out and you may be arrested. Okay, that's why the Foreign Affairs Ministry has to really liaise with the embassy in Washington, and then the authorities in Washington, the Ghanaian authorities in Washington, will now liaise with the local authorities in the U.S. Okay, you're talking about someone who has come into the country and living there. So you cannot just apprehend the man.
Because they don't have any jurisdiction there.
Exactly. So you need the local authorities who would then effect that arrest based on the information that has been given.
That sounds like highly unlikely, right? I mean, we have the case of
Tamaklo,
who was tried in absentia, convicted here, the former head of Maslog. We're told she was in the U.S. She's never come back. I mean, the U.S. didn't arrest her and bring her on, put her on a plane and ship her back to Ghana.
Yeah. So it means that, well, our authorities didn't go a step further with regards to, involving those authorities there. You understand? Because you and I cannot, even if we're in the U.S., cannot just go and apprehend Ken and then bring it back. No, you're putting yourself into trouble. That's why the OSP just provided the telephone number that you call. But then it means that the OSP is relying on just anybody instead of relying on the embassies in there to do the work. You don't need to put the telephone numbers for people to call because they can only call, they can arrest. The authorities in there will have to do the arrest with officials of the Ghanaian embassy there, collaboratively, and then now the Interpol's, approval and publication of the notice that you have sent, which will tick all the boxes per Interpol's policies before. So even with that one, it has not been published. Okay, so it will take some time before Interpol will publish it in the system for all its member countries or member states to now actively engage and follow up in case it leaves the US to other countries. So there has to be a lot of collaboration. But first, the OSP, his office, should have done some groundwork to ascertain where Mr. Ken is even before he comes up with this information.
And that's the point there. And then, Mr. Sari, there is a big legal question around extradition. He says he's triggered the extradition process. Is it that simple? What would it take to have him extradited, assuming he even locates him? How simple is it?
I don't think it's a simple matter. First of all, I should like to believe that our international treaties and cooperation processes are working effectively as the three of us have said, see, the whole thing has not been managed well. The OSP hasn't managed this, process well at all. I can understand, where the OSP is coming from. The special prosecutor is under pressure, maybe from government, maybe from the NDC party, from the MPP party. The whole thing has become politicized. And therefore, it's affecting not only the reputation of Ofori-Atta, but also the reputation of the country. Now, the international Interpol organizations are going to read political meanings into, the exchanges that are going on. And therefore, on the one hand, they may feel that the whole thing is politically motivated. And extraditing a person under such circumstances is going to be pretty difficult if the extraditing nation believes, or so the firm believes that when Ken comes, he's not going to get the justice, that the international tribunals, would administer. They are not going to cooperate. I mean, if I know that, if he comes, he won't get the justice that, for instance, he will get in the UK or US or Germany or France, they will not cooperate. And I think that the special prosecutor has talked too much, but done very little. This is not a matter that should have reached where, we find ourselves now. From the moment that it became clear to him that Ken Ofori-Atta was not going to play ball or was not cooperating, he should have used or employed the services of our foreign missions. And that's the job of the foreign mission. They will have to go and trigger all this extradition process. What do we do? Do we have a treaty of extradition, under cooperation, arrangements? Is it possible to do this? All these questions will have to be, asked and answered on the quiet, instead of putting out information on the public domain, shouting from the rooftop, and not getting any result. Where we are now, we find ourselves in some ambivalence. We want, to fight corruption, but we don't know how to, fight corruption. We want, to test our endurance of, fighting corruption. But we don't have the resources to do that. It's a very simple matter that the special prosecutor, could have flown to the US, find personal, evidence, personal information, to be able to come and report to the president. I went there, I saw him.
But he shouldn't be reporting to the president. I mean, that can happen. It's the OSP.
Well, he can report to the president through the attorney general, because he is appointed by the president. And therefore, he's accountable to the president, subject to the Constitution. So instead of always, holding press conferences and saying this and say, that's not how
but he must update
the
public.
criminal law must work.
But his office is slightly different. I mean, he's an ombudsman.
You see, under the law, under the act,
he must account, he must report.
He must, and not only that, also show, convictions, not only to arrest and prosecute, but to secure a conviction. That is his dilemma. He has a 7-year non-renewable tenure in office. Now, what is he going to show at the end of the 7th year? Because he's not going to come back. Maybe 6.5 years on, the president is likely to appoint his successor, to be in office for another 6 months, before the 7-year tenure, will run out. So maybe, some pieces of advice to the special prosecutor that we have state resources which can be used effectively, to approach this matter in the most efficient manner to yield results. Now, if you begin by brandishing to the whole world that your former foreign minister, is the most wanted person in Ghana.
Former finance minister, yeah.
Former finance minister is the most wanted, person in Ghana, without having first declared him, a criminal, who has been so,
But he's a fugitive.
pronounced by the under the
He
law.
believes he's a fugitive. He's running away from answering.
Yeah, he's running away because, that's why I used the word, terror. He's been threatened, so much so with arrests, with detention at the airport. They will do this. We could have, gone about this thing in a very decent and civilized manner. You cooperate. I mean, if you've been to, the Western where you are under arrest, oh, hello, so,
Not always, especially when the individual in question has turned down or refusing to show up. The OSP believes he has the right now to extend this wanted notice. But let me quickly wrap up with Adamson on the very. Adamson, so what should happen now? I mean, we appear to be at a deadlock. There's a stalemate on this matter, but accountability is what fundamentally must happen here. What should happen so we get to the accountability? We know what really happened. And if he's guilty, of course, throw him in jail or get our monies back. If he's not, he walks. What must happen?
Well, I think that some very useful suggestions have come here, taking advantage of our embassies to try and properly locate where he is. When Mr. Ansasari says we should fly to the US when we don't even know where exactly he is, I think that would be a waste of money. So let's take advantage of the existing embassy structure and see what additional information. I'm delighted you say he says he's working through the AG's and the foreign ministry, see what can be done. Yes, I think that's important to narrow down exactly where he could find out. I think that the course of action he's already described is feasible. Try him in absentia. There's nothing wrong with that. So if the facts and the evidence are available, you can go to court and get a conviction. Proceed on that trajectory. I think it's important to note part of what lawyer Bafo said was misleading. In the case of La Bianca, over 1 million Ghana cedis had been retrieved. And there was an issue of, I think, advance ruling that they felt there could be some criminal activity, so they took that to court. So it wasn't the case that nothing came out of the La Bianca case. Similarly, with the Cecilia Dapa, all of us in the anti-corruption sector are clear that IOCO's law covers it. And it's the reason why in this week, we know that IOCO has now approached the OSP saying they are willing to take that case again and investigate and come to a conclusion. So I think we need to watch that space. But with Ken Ofori-Atta, let the special prosecutor take advantage of the foreign agencies we have, get more information, continue the trajectory of trying in absentia if that's the case. And if the lawyers have credible evidence that there is this medical condition, which is strange that between February and now they didn't provide it, they should please engage. I'm quite sure that the OSP will be willing to listen to them, and if it is credible, amend his actions and strategies accordingly.
Dr. Doke?
As of now, let's be wary. In as much as we want to ensure accountability, the said gentleman, Mr. Ken Ofori-Atta's life is also in danger now. Why do I say so? Now, anyone who sees him and doesn't understand the rule of law may try to mete out instant justice to him. So for him also, he's now afraid. He's scared, no matter what. The only process now that will give clarity and for the OSP and the Ghanaian authority to proceed will be the results or the outcome of Interpol, the assessment of what has been sent to their office, and then to publish. Now, aside that, what can be done, as I earlier on stated, you can locate where he is using the embassy there, and then cautiously, I use the word cautiously, when you try to arrest him, that's against the law also, because then you can't bring him. That will be kidnapping. So there's only those local law enforcement in the US that can now invite him. There's a process also there that has to be satisfied before he will be brought back here. And that's another, discussion altogether. But now we haven't even been able to cross step one, which is, getting Interpol, the red alert, the clearance, and then publications going in, through. But until that is done, this is a long haul.
Indeed, it is. Thank you, Doc. Prof, I'm grateful that you joined me on this. This is a very controversial one indeed. Now, the big open question is, when would Interpol publish that red notice? Because that changes the game quite significantly. Enjoy the rest of your evening.